Sustainability is one of the key issues of our time, but it can feel like a huge problem to tackle. And with climate change a particular area of concern at this time, setting net zero targets is a key way that institutions can start to build a strategy towards making a real impact. Long before net zero became a buzzword, some organisations had already recognised the importance of carbon reduction and started to make progress in reducing their impact in this area. What they found is that reporting is a critical component to setting targets and measuring performance. Any organisation keen to embed sustainability and respond to the climate crisis will recognise that establishing specific and measurable targets and reporting against these is critical to demonstrating progress. We'll talk a little bit more about this throughout the podcast. Hello, I'm Russell Burton, Chairman of Hillside Environmental Services, an organisation dedicated to supporting further education in developing pathways to net zero. I'm joined today by Dr. Alex Ryan of the University of Gloucestershire to talk about reporting and the Green Gown Awards. Alex, perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself to our audience today.
Hi, Russell, and great warm thank you for inviting us onto the podcast. We actually love coming to talk about what we're getting up to, and particularly our reporting, which we've worked really hard on. And we were really glad to be invited. Thank you. So I'm the Director of Sustainability at University of Gloucestershire, and so that job has me responsible for the university's sustainability strategy and programme. There's a small team working with me to deliver it, but also we work right across the whole university and collaborate with everyone from the operational side to the academic teams and the students and outwards with partners. So we have a very diverse and buzzy range of things that we get up to.
Excellent. For those of you on the podcast today who are unaware of the Green Gown Awards, these are annual awards run by the EAUC, both within the UK and internationally. The awards have become established as the most prestigious recognition of environmental best practice within the further and higher education sectors and provide the sector with benchmarks for excellence. The University of Gloucestershire won the highly commended in the Reporting with Influence category in the 2021 Green Gown Awards for their annual sustainability report. And I was fortunate enough to be a member of the judging panel and was very impressed by the variety of the sustainability initiatives that the university covered in their report and the way that they align that to the human and stakeholder perspective. Alex, perhaps you'd like to give our listeners some more background to the university's approach to sustainability reporting and how that process has evolved over time.
Yeah, sure, Russell. And as well, I think you'd said to us, tell us the scene set of the university as well. So it's we have around sort of 10,000 students and 1,500 staff, and we're spread across several sites in Cheltenham and Gloucester. And we've got an exciting new campus development at our Gloucester premises, which is that we've got a city centre regeneration campus coming, which was from the old Debenhams building. So it's an exciting time for us. We're one of the sort of newer universities in the sector, very, growing, ambitious, with roots in teacher training, arts and mechanics and things like that, and going into health and STEM more now and cyber. So this is it's a dynamic university with a strong background in applied education and really trying to be a force for good within our county. And it's some of that character that has been quite deeply linked into our sustainability commitment. We were one of the early pioneers that went out on the sustainability agenda from back in the 90s. And then once we turned into the new millennium, decided that we were going to be strategically and corporately committed to this and to set up a program and really go hard on pushing this right across into the fabric of the organization. We had, and I was giving myself a look at it for amusement before we started, we actually had our first bit of reporting back in 1993, would you believe? And some of our academic teams in the geography and environment area wrote a state of the environment report. It looked nothing like our sustainability report now, because as it always was back in the day, it was loads and loads of words and lots of text. And of course, it was hard copy and it wasn't digital at all. Whereas one of the things we did with our sustainability report, and the one that you were part of the judging panel for is the sort of the current iteration of it. And that iteration of our sustainability report was one that we brought into being very intentionally in our last strategy, which was our second strategy in terms of the maturity of our program. And we've just written our third sustainability strategy, and it's just about to be published this summer. But in our second strategy, we realized that in strategy one, we had got the program going well. We'd set up a lot of policy and frameworks. We'd started the good practices. We made some strides on carbon. We made some strides on our education agenda. But we still needed to do more to, for one, mature our environmental management system and make sure that, for one, we were transiting to the new standard for 14,001, ISO 14,001. And so we needed a better, more interlinked, locked into the business approach of the system of target setting, monitoring, reporting, and publicly communicating in order to be transparent. So we wanted to kind of sharpen all that aspect up and make a sort of much more crisp and digestible report that would go public, would go to all audiences, whether they were an auditor or a student or a parent, and could be grasped in the basics. And the second related reason was not just for a sort of corporate responsibility and being transparent reason, it was for the buy-in to the program and to increase understanding of the full range of what we were doing, and to also build that pride and that ownership that then fuels more good evolutions. So it was all of those sort of reasons that went into this report and why we did it.
That's a fabulous background, and I suppose one of the questions really before we move into the sort of some of the more depth is that pioneering role that you've taken in leading the sector to recognise reporting as an objective. How did you feel against your peers early in the process, and how did they respond to your leadership on that agenda?
Well, I think when we were developing this report, we certainly were actually recognised, I think, with another award way back when we did our very first proper full sustainability report, which was in kind of chapter 1 of our journey. But it was a bit of a one-off, and it was quite sizable. It was still quite a big, high volume, high density report, because one of the things that we've evolved over time is trying to understand the sweet spot of the picking what of all the many, many things that could go in are going to go in. And that is a real set of choices that's very, very deliberate, because you want to show the span. You want to choose the most impactful things. You want to count and show the things that really count, but you also don't want to leave anybody out. And that becomes quite difficult in a big sprawly organization like a university, where there is actually lots of terrific stuff going on, but not everything can go in a report. Otherwise it'll become unreadable and nobody will read it. And then you miss the sort of buy-in thing. So I think our very earliest one was maybe a bit large. And then we wanted to just kind of slim it down a bit more and get it a bit sharper focused. At that time, when we sort of did that second evolution of it, I think there were certainly a lot of reports developing amongst our colleagues in the sector and other institutions. I think they were still quite text heavy. There wasn't as much use of really good, sharp infographics and visuals, and we really wanted to try and have a go at that, so we did. I mean, it's not perfect, of course, nothing ever is, but, we had a really good go at thinking through how could we, for instance, communicate carbon, which is so technical and so complicated, even for specialists. It's really complicated. So for lay people, it's quite hard to get across the basics and give people some information that they could also trust and know that they're getting the important information and not the greenwash. So that was kind of where we were at. It was really a lot about the choices and the communicating methods. that we would use to try and sort of nudge a bit further than what we were generally seeing, 5-6 years ago, I guess that was.
Yeah, as a reader of your report for last year, I must say that the way that you described quite a broad church of activities in such a very digestible and understandable way is one of the strengths of the reporting with influence, because you then engage the audience, you get people's attention to the subject matter, and then they can see a pathway for themselves to follow and enable them to pursue the agenda as well. So
that's right. And the little add-on I'd say there, thanks for that, Russell, because the little add-on I'd say there is that one of the other purposes that we've always had at University of Gloucestershire was that we really wanted to be truthful to the principle of, if you are embedding sustainability in your organisation, one of your first questions is always, what is the core product or service of my organisation? And if I'm not putting sustainability in that core product or service, what on earth am I doing? And actually, we're an educational organisation. So our core service is the education. And our uni became known and kind of got its recognition for really driving hard at the agenda around bringing sustainability learning into our curriculum portfolio, not just the usual subjects like environment, but all subjects, and bringing it in as an agenda for good education. So one of the things that was very common, and is still reasonably common in a lot of sustainability reports, is that they talk about the facilities management, the campus estate, and the operational sustainability metrics and the environmental management targets. And we wanted to create that balance so that you can see all of that operational stuff that any organisation must do to be worth its salt as walking its talk, but that actually we're really trying to show what it's like to put it in the core academic activity, which is the real business embedding in the truest sense.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Alex. I just wondered if you could give us some examples of the kind of things that you're doing to encourage that collaboration and development of educational skills across the piece.
Yes, sure. And I think, one of the things that we get very excited about is when we can share and partner with particularly young people and other parts of the education sector, not just business and research institutions and so on. So some of the things that come to mind, and I mean, it makes me smile because you are congratulating us on our having done well in the Green Gown Awards with our sustainability report. And actually, one of the things about that report that pleased me the most was when we heard back unprompted from someone in a regional sustainable schools network that what they were doing with our sustainability report is they loved it so much they were sharing it and using it in the classroom with young children to help them to look at sustainability reporting and go, oh, this is the sort of thing that goes in and what's interesting here. I got such a thrill from that. And in the similar spirit, one of the projects that we're doing this year, and is actually an event that we're doing next month, is with our Cheltenham Education Partnership, which is all the 10 secondary schools of Cheltenham. And they, having initiated a project called Changemakers, where they've been doing eco-action work in their own schools, they've then come to the university and said, can we do something together with this sustainability learning stuff you're doing at the university? And we want it to have a bit of a spin around jobs for the future and what are those opportunities going to be for today's secondary school students in the future. So we're doing a great event where we've brought together the academic expertise in sustainability in the institution, linked it with curriculum areas at secondary level, and the topics and issues that students are really concerned about, and put together some themed workshops that show both some of the topic knowledge and some of the industry perspective of what the real workplace challenges of sustainability are, and put that all into some speed learning workshops on themes like money and greenwash, or communicating and influencing, designing the future, and put those workshops together with a little applied speed learning taster
Yeah.
So that's the sort of thing that gets us tremendously excited and just, helps us feel that we're working with the next generation who are going to be those professionals of the future to really sort of embed this deeper learning and this innovation agenda.
Well, I can understand the inspiration. That's part of my motivation about the future generations, how we can help them to have a better world. So, well, one of the things that started to emerge just recently is the momentum for colleges and universities to develop net zero roadmaps. And there's a variety of reasons behind that. There's a lot of drivers that are causing that situation, not least of which is the Department for Education's sustainability and climate change strategy. Now, I know that you guys have set yourselves a net zero target. Can you just let us know when that is and how you're expecting to drive to achieve that?
Yeah, sure. So we started from a point of having done our first carbon strategy, which ran from 2010 to 2020, and that had a 40% reduction target for scopes 1 and 2 emissions. And we were happy that we actually managed to overshoot that target, and we ended up with sort of 45% by the time we were sort of on that final measure. So we were jumping off from that platform when it came to, right, the next strategy will be framed in line with the net zero agenda and the net zero conversation. And so what we have gone for is another 10-year sort of jump point. So our net zero target is for 2030, and we've set scope specific targets now for an add-on achievement on scope 1, which is 33%, an add-on achievement of an additional 32% on scope 2. We've got scope 3 separated out. We've got scope 3 travel with a 3% target, which sounds much smaller, but the reason for that is that we are factoring in the variable of growth there because we've got quite a big growth ambition over the next 5 years. And then our scope 3 procurement, we've separated out as a separate target because, of course, travel and procurement, they're the two fattest parts of most universities' scope 3 emissions, but they are incredibly different sorts of activity and incredibly different sorts of solutions and interventions needed. So the scope 3 procurement target is 34%. And that accounts for as well the fact that we'll have a construction emissions hump of activity while we regenerate this new city campus in Gloucester that I mentioned earlier in the podcast. And we're going as well, I would say, as well, for as much drive down as possible and as little offset as possible, of course, because, again, we were an early pioneer, so we can't afford to have a net zero plan that's got a whole huge lot of trying to buy our way out of trouble with loads of offset spend. That's not going to cut it for us.
Yeah, I must admit, when we do the emissions reviews for customers, one of the challenges we do face is diverting people's attention away from offsetting as their primary source of reduction, because you've got to plant a lot of trees to reduce your carbon. If I can split the scope 1 and the scope 2 strategies into two separate categories, I mean, what are the key strategies that you're adopting for your scope 1 and scope 2? Are you adopting renewable technologies? Are you buying from green sources of energy supply? What strategy are you adopting for your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions reduction first?
Yeah, sure. And actually, a couple of just overview things to say are that as policy context, one of the other elements of the whole carbon journey has been the fossil fuel divestment, which was important to us. And we drove towards that and achieved that in 2018. So again, that was, in terms of messaging and communicating to everybody about our seriousness, that was actually a really important milestone, which we went for on the last strategy. I think another thing to say is that we have had green energy supply for a long time. And of course, everything coming down the same pipe, we're very open about the fact that nobody can say their supply is 100% pure on that count, because even there's a bit of nuclear around in most supply, isn't there? But so that's kind of stuff that's almost already kind of slightly ticked off for us in terms of just policy level things that we would just want to maintain and continue in that manner. What our sort of net zero works over the next few years are all about are, first of all, doing as much heat change as we can and shifting from the gas boilers to air source heat pumps. So there's a progressive program going on there, and we've been very pleased to be able to get hold of some grant-funded SALIX decarbonisation, public sector decarbonisation scheme monies to help support some of that work, which is already going on this year and into next year at 2 of our existing campuses. We've then got a third grant to help our new city campus in Gloucester to be fully electric heating and to do some insulation and other fabric works there to help with those things. We've got about 25% of the estate still needing to do LED lamping. So there's a little bit more of the LED program to complete. We'll then, we're kind of like really crazy busy with our city campus project at the moment because it's on a really fast train track trying to open in another year or two. So we're actually like a little bit hands on deck with that all across the university at the moment. But once that's done, we want to then maybe come back to the idea of where else could we do some more solar PV. That's not something we have a huge amount of at our campuses, just a lot to do with how the buildings are and the opportunities to actually get more PV on. But we want to actually return to that in another couple of years and see if we can do a little bit more. So, and the other one that's actually really important to us is just strengthening energy management generally.
Yeah.
We've got building management systems that we can do a lot more with to just actually make some more deliberate and strategic changes about how we run the buildings and the estate. So that's actually, although that may not be exciting and whizzy and an innovation, solution, actually that's going to be critical in our net zero. I would say roadmap, but actually our carbon leaders instead made us a beautiful tube map. It looks like the London tube system with all the little projects on it, and that's in our net zero plan.
Yeah, I must admit that the monitoring and verification of installations and the energy management of data, or the use of data to manage energy is one of the biggest challenges I think that the sector faces. It's because it can be resource intensive. It can be human. It can require a lot of intervention from people to analyse data and turn it into meaningful output. So that's quite an important piece of the jigsaw. I was very impressed with the sustainability report you produced last year, and I think around the Scope 3 emissions and the fact that Scope 3 is more about influencing third-party organisations beyond the gate organisations to participate. I just wondered whether your reporting strategies feed into that process and how you use your sustainability reports to influence those other stakeholders that you engage with.
Yeah, I think. Actually, in terms of when you sort of asked that question about Scope 3, we're not actually a huge university, so we don't necessarily perceive our Scope 3 actions down the supply chain as ones where we're not sort of daft enough to consider ourselves the giant player with some of the businesses that we contract with. So, there are ways in which we procure and set our tenders and our specs to put out an expectation that we really want to see a bit of ambition, that we expect to see a low carbon response in those who are actually looking to work with us. But that's actually not one of the places where we see ourselves as being the most influential. And one of the stakeholder objectives really, or purposes of the sustainability report is an awful lot to do with the set of internal stakeholders and getting the word out. So, on a procurement level, getting the word out internally to all the different people in different parts of the university who do buying and are the buyers of this and that, or the tender writers of this and that. That's one of them. But also getting word out to everybody about how all of this stuff joins up, how a sustainability strategy joins up with what's seen in the internal management documents about what the sustainability's business plan of the year is and what they would see in other business plans, say in the infrastructural teams. How does that link to our environmental management and the annual reviews of that? That's the sort of influence and communicating about how all of this works and where your part in it is, that we really want our sustainability report to be part of that general getting the word out, getting the understanding built, and just supporting how the whole university takes it forward.
One of the things I'm interested in here is the fact that the University of Gloucestershire has got a BSI accredited ISO 14001 mark. I am a big advocate of ISO 14001. That's what I do for a living. And I just wondered that there are very few institutions that adopt that process. How does that help you manage that whole sustainability process and program with your stakeholders and with the organizational leadership?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. And actually, we've just had our annual audit earlier this week. So it's some of these conversations with the auditor, this year's conversations are very fresh in my mind. And I think, like you say, this kind of system, if you're going to do it, you need to have a reason why to and what you're going to try and use it for, rather than just it be a thing that sits there abstractly as a certificate on a wall that nobody knows what it's all about. And I think when I came into this role, it was a little bit more like that. And also the 14001 system was led from within the estates division. So it didn't have that link to the wider sustainability strategy that is involving all parts of the university. So for me, this is about how you mature a 14001 system so that it actually becomes a supportive wheel or motor that helps to turn the volume up or drive, whichever analogy you want, your wider strategy and those bigger objectives that you have. And that's something we've worked quite hard on with our environmental management system over the last few years, and that we were talking with the auditor about earlier this week about how it really has matured now, that it's much more of an engine to the wider sustainability strategy, which itself is also an engine room that's linked into the whole corporate strategy and its core business academic objectives. So it's been about that, seeing how you can get the one thing driving the other the right way round and not tail wagging the dog kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, ISO 14001 is a completely, it is for me the way to embed environmental thinking across all stakeholders, staff, students, wider audience. So it's really interesting to hear your description there, because I think that's exactly the purpose of ISO 14001 and how it can then embed into the sustainability strategies of any organisation. Yes,
and one of the things that the sustainability reports is going to be even sharper on next time is we've actually developed a quality system and a methodology separately for rating the quality of what we're doing in the curriculum space. Okay. So we'll actually be able to start reporting that in a more tangible way, which is not something that is usually done in the sector at all yet. That's new. But that also harks back to the fact that we've always had the educational activity as one of our important aspects within the environmental management system. I think we were the first English institution not just to get 14001, but to put the curriculum in scope. And what we didn't ever want to do was have an environmental management system driving the curriculum, because that would be an incorrect relationship. Yeah. And I'm an academic by background. I would never let that happen. The academic quality machinery and the ownership of that main business sits with the academic patch, as it rightly should do. But the amplification and the joined upness that you can get through actually making a link across to environmental management, but in a suitable way, is really, really quite important. And that's something that we have done very deliberately and that we just carefully cultivate so that all parts of the system start to work together to the greater objective.
So if you take that onto its next level, I mean, I would imagine one of the more important stakeholders in your audience is the students. How do they play as a driver for Gloucestershire's commitment to achieving net zero, achieving sustainability? What's their role in the university's thought process and reporting matrix?
Yes, I mean, that's a really interesting one, because actually I would say there's a few sort of layers to it. There's an overall sense in which our students always seem to be incredibly proud of what we are doing and proud to be at an institution that takes this seriously and that is doing it authentically. And that's feedback that we get in surveys that we do, as well as informally, all the time. In terms of what they choose to drive, that's another different bit, because of course student interests and passions change. And they change almost by the year. 1 year waste might be a real enthusiasm. Another year carbon would be a real enthusiasm. Another year it will be about holistic approaches to well-being and how well-being and being in nature connect and all of those kinds of things. So, the nature of what students are naturally interested in is something that we want to support and encourage. At the same time, we're a learning agenda with our sustainability work, and that's terribly serious to us. So we also want to be exposing to students an even bigger picture and encouraging them to think even further and collaborate with us on some of the things that we're doing that might actually jump further than the natural passion they had when they walked in the door of our university. And then, of course, when you talk about walking in the door of the university, you always have that question about, well, how is it ever going to be a recruitment driver? And people at all levels, from your exec to your governors to external businesses we talk to, always are very interested in that question. And there are national surveys that the NUS, the National Union of Students, have been doing for years now that point to a very high level of interest among students in this. But on the other hand, student decision-making about places at university and what they want to do at university is very sophisticated and complicated matter. And certainly we have never claimed that this is the one factor that would make a student choose to come to our university. But what's really interesting at the moment, I would say, is that what we hear both from students themselves and also increasingly anecdotally from our different course teams is that they are getting a lot more and more feedback as the years go by, that actually this is becoming one of the factors. It might be a sway factor in a choice between two institutions. It might just be one of the interest factors that made them notice our university and then inquire, right, is this course the course I want? But it's really interesting just starting to understand in a more nuanced way, where is the place of sustainability in decision-making and what is it that students are after? And I think that's a subtle thing that we need to inquire into a lot more carefully.
Yeah, I think there's two sort of follow-ons from that might be worth just exploring a little bit. I mean, the one that, I see students in lots of organisations more in the further education, so post 16 to 18 groups. And I was interested to read a report from the Lancet about 12 months ago, covering the subject of climate anxiety as a genuine mental health issue within the younger population, say 16 to 25 group. And so the ability of an organisation to do sustainability in a very authentic way and provide a pathway, maybe that's quite a helpful aspect for universities to feature into supporting students. But also, I am delivering net zero programs across the country. One of our biggest challenges is skills gap, where there is a huge gap of skills to actually deliver net zero projects, whether it's in technical or in commercial arrangements. And one of the things that I think is quite important for students is to see a pathway that they can pursue a career into the sustainability or the green economy. And I don't know whether your reporting systems enable and support some of those aspects in the way that your students feel about the university's approach to the subject.
That's a really interesting set of comments that sparked up a load of things in my brain. So I'll try and capture a few. So I think just to go in on the reporting bit in particular, I think there are a few things so in the mood and the atmosphere of coming back onto campus post-pandemic, one of those things that has been quite important for us to put into the report has been to capture how on-campus activities directed at well-being has been really important. And particularly for us, one of those things has been, we're blessed to live in a rural county and work and be at university in a rural county where we have some very beautiful green spaces on our campuses. And so when we were coming back from the world of everybody doing virtual learning and back from lockdowns and back onto campus, we've put a lot of effort into gardening as one of the activities that we would really open up and offer to students to help them build back a sense of community and belonging, make friends again, get out in the fresh air, do some hands-on stuff, and just physically be on campus. And to then again sew together that link between health, biodiversity, and how the whole sustainability paradigm comes together. And in our report, one of the things we really wanted to do was to keep talking about the sort of both the good and the bad aspects of what COVID pandemic has done to our sustainability endeavors. Obviously, waste kind of went a bit worse due to the pandemic, but other things like, a decent sort of 45% drop on the commute have been, good effect. Yeah. So it's a mixed bag, isn't it? But capturing all of that's been really, really important to us in the reporting. I think a second thing that was jumping around in my mind when you were talking about net zero and the students and stakeholders has just been with our carbon net zero program. So, just widening out from just the reporting out into the actual implementational program. There's been an awful lot of interesting stuff we've learned about just how to communicate about the net zero paradigm and to link that back into where the audience will latch on to things like low carbon travel and why that's good for well-being. And one of our auditor this week was talking to us about how can we do an even more sophisticated recalibration of the requirements of an environmental management system, but remodeled in terms of the net zero journey. So that actually all of that really locks together, but with a stakeholder's perspective that ISO 14001 new standard looks for. So that, there's some really interesting stuff for us there.
Yeah, excellent. You're sort of looking to communicate with your stakeholders, both inside and outside. What do you think are the key or the most important aspects to communicate, and what are the drivers that make you decide what goes into a report and what is left on the cutting room floor?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think unfortunately what's generally left on the cutting room floor is just lots of great stories that could have gone in and just there's not enough space. So I'm always we put a call out always for the content into the university when we're starting the report each year, just to see if there are any stories that we've missed. Because to be honest, once your sustainability program starts to mature, for me, every year the sustainability report is quite educational. There's always something that I didn't know about, which is quite good. I take that as a positive, not me taking my eye off the ball. That's how I choose to look at it. But then I almost feel like I have to send around an apology afterwards to everybody whose story didn't make it this year, because we do have to choose, otherwise it just becomes huge. But for us, I think I've sort of mentioned this a bit earlier in the podcast. One of the really important things is to do the authenticity message by showing the metrics and being really honest. And we rag rate the top ones about where we're doing okay and where we're falling short, because I think it's really important to, in these days, one of the obsessions of any sustainability director is the radical transparency question around sustainability now and the greenwash question. So being absolutely as honest as we can be about where we've fallen short a bit and that we're going to try a bit harder, and just saying it how it is, I think is important. And that's kind of a lot of the stuff on the footprint side of it. But when you switch over to the brain print side of sustainability, which is really important to us, we really want to put into that report and convey how we really do see sustainability in the learning experience as a critical part of our mission and a critical part of the outcome that we want students to have through our sustainability program. And it's an outcome that's not just about giving a little nod to the knowledge and the science. It's an outcome that's about this sustainability business being core to what a good education of the future is. And that what we were trying to do here is we're trying to equip you not just to be able to go out and get a job and fit into the system as is, but we want you to see and know how to do sustainability as an innovation thing that will give you an edge, whatever organization or profession you're going to, or if you're going to be a self-employed freelance artist, whatever you're going to go and do with your working and professional life, that you have that insight and ability to apply the knowledge, drive change, bring people together, and really be part of an innovation agenda around sustainability. So that sort of dynamic brain print thing, that's got to come across in a good report. And then for me, then it's about the glue and trying to get across how some of the stuff about putting it in practice, the footprint stuff, some of the stuff about brain print and the learning, and some of the stuff about how you collaborate, how sustainability is an agenda that is gluing all those things together, finding the cross-business links and driving richer, multiple benefits for stakeholders. That's actually if you can get that right, that should be the top award-winning report we're all aspiring to.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just one final aspect that I wanted to cover before we close, Alex. It's interesting that the university have been pursuing this for such a long time. 1993 is a very early time to have started this journey. I'm a lifelong environmentalist, but I've had to earn a living in construction just because nobody wanted to employ me as an environmentalist when I first started. And it was quite interesting to listen to a statement that Her Majesty said about Winston Churchill, about the further you look back, the more you can see into the future. If you look back over your career, and I look back over my career, and you see some of the barriers we've faced to moving this agenda forward, where do you see the main barriers now to achieving the ultimate goal of net zero for institutions, but also for the country?
Yeah, I think inevitably we can only really speak in the moment of now, can't we? And we'd be mad to avoid the very difficult cost pressures. I think, we can see the atmosphere that we're in at the moment now is one of declining resource everywhere. And that's going to continue to be difficult. I think for universities and net zero in particular, it would be it's so obvious, it seems silly to say it, but universities cannot make this net zero journey without government support. These schemes, like the public sector decarbonisation scheme, we have the kinds of estate and campus infrastructure that are not going to get there unless there is more of that kind of support from the top level. Universities have so many conflicting pressures upon them already financially that is an absolute must. So, of course, that is going to be a huge barrier if that support is not forthcoming. To the plus, of course, the natural UK decarbonisation journey is going to help. The more that transport is electrified, obviously this will be a good thing. So that's one. I think the cost thing is the real issue, and we can't deny that. It's going to continue to be tricky, and that again is one of the reasons why I think it's so important within a university to be able to join up different aspects of activity, different aims at the high level of the organisation, and find those linked benefits that are part of the core business success. Because otherwise the cost pressures may, unravel sustainability, and we don't obviously want that. There is too much goodness to be had from this agenda. We can't afford to let it become a narrow beam agenda that's only seen as being something about a difficult financial playoff, because it's actually an awful lot more than that. And so that's where the sort of the communication and the understanding continues to be really, really important, and conveying that triple bottom line message that this is a triple bottom line agenda, and we can't just look at the numbers on the profit bottom line. I think one of the other difficult spaces at the moment, and I think this is just generally, I see it generally just in the discourse and the chat about sustainability out there, is getting over those concern to action gaps and understanding how we can make the changes and make a difference by understanding both the high-level structural system change, whether that's the governmental level, whether it's in a local context of local, regional endeavours, or whether it's the system of your own business and the executive level things that you put in place to support change, and understanding that system level perspective as against the behavior change level perspective. You take a topic, a fiercely, constantly tricky topic like travel, and how do you get people traveling on lower carbon modes? There's always going to be that difficult space between the fact that people, depending on the travel options around them that are viable for the journeys they've got to make, that is going to be connected to the choices that they can make as individuals, and understanding both parameters, not just seeing it as, well, if you care about the environment, you'll get on the bus then, won't you? Actually, for us in a multi-site campus, in a rural environment, it isn't actually always possible for everybody. And so understanding that link, not just expecting this to be a behavior change problem or just a system change problem, it's both. And I think that is a space there's quite a few issues in sustainability where we're still really trying to understand the trickiness and the sophistication of cracking some of that and getting that sort of sweet spot of where our interventions understand the macro and the micro, and how to actually cut a line through the middle of it and make a difference.
Dr. Ryan, it's been a pleasure to meet you today and have that conversation. To anybody out there who's listening to this, thinking about applying to the Green Gown Awards for their reporting categories, we hope this has been helpful, and best of luck with your application. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.